Excellent.
Yeah.
How are you doing, Ellen?
I'm well. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you.
I'm a
Michael?
happy camper today.
Yes, yeah, and I can see you on the beach. Awesome.
Yes, I take the day off and I'm at the beach.
How you doing, Michael?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. I don't know how many people of you are in Victoria, but no doubt will you are all looking forward to the weekend and go out and about, things that we experienced here in Sydney last week. So don't be surprised if you are in lots of traffic jams because everybody wants to get out. So stay at the beach, Ellen.
Yeah, the beach is looking really empty.
Yeah, right now it does. It won't be on the weekend.
All right. Great to see a fair few people joining already. So as Mark said, thank you everyone for joining us today. Very happy Friday. And of course to everyone in Melbourne, very happy end of lockdown. Looks like it's going to be a great weekend weather-wise. So we're good that we're kicking the weekend off with this great session, lunchtime session today. So today we'll be talking through project governance and what that means within your PMO. And just before we start, just some housekeeping as usual. So we ask that you please remain on mute just while our presenters and any other attendees are talking, just so we can ensure a consistent and flowing conversation today. If you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to raise your hand or just pop it in the chat and we'll work through them as we see them come through. So today we have Mark Soyster, our Executive Director at Sensei, and Paul Oppong, one of our fantastic PPM consultants, joining us. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves and then we can get going.
Awesome. Thank you, Alice. Lovely to see you. Some of you again, lots of you new, which is great to see that you have well sacrificed your lunch for some pure PMO pleasure of the next hour. Just quickly over to you, Paul. Maybe say hi.
Hello. Thanks, Mark. Looking forward to this.
Excellent. Well, look, we are action-packed today and we have lots and lots of information. It really goes a little bit also in line with last month, Ask the Expert session about, different PMOs and strategic PMOs, etc. So really the main takeaway for us, I know it sounds a little bbit fluffy, but really in order for us to ensure that we understand how we govern the PMO in the 21st century, we want to make sure that that we understand what the big picture of the organization actually looks like and how we can govern that, ensuring that you have the right processes in place, in particular when we are talking about, well, I call it the very radical waterfall versus the very radical agile, and how we actually, in most cases, manage our hybrid PMO model. And we refer to that actually as the controlled governance. And by the end of it, I hope that you have a couple of takeaways for your own PMO. Now, before I do that, I would like to start with a poll, if that's okay. You should see a poll in a second in front of you. Alice, if you could just open that up. What does governance mean for you? Ensure that all initiatives are executed as planned, provide a guideline on how to execute initiatives. And when I talk about initiatives, I generally talk about project programs and even portfolios, of course. Tell the people off when they don't follow the process, the typical dictatorship PMO, as I like to call it. And of course, maybe even, these days we want to focus on the outcome and the benefit of the initiatives. What does governance mean for you these days? Let's have a look. If you could submit your answer. We've got 11 respondents. I know we have at least 32 people on the call, if not more. Clearly there is one. It's changing. Yeah, tell people off. That must be Andy. Hello, Andy. Our CEO is online as well. And then, of course, we can see a trend of provide a guideline on how to execute initiatives in a consistent manner. And I know how difficult that can be, especially because most of the times we do live in an environment where project management maturity really is very, very vast, from the very professional project managers all the way down to the subject matter expert that just needs to organize an initiative. So these results will will of course be posted, and also for your own benefit will be in the pack that we sent after the session. So at this point in time, yeah, clearly the provide guidelines on how to execute the initiative in a consistent manner is sort of that main purpose of the PMO. Still, I'm going to say, because funnily enough, the focus on outcome and benefit of initiatives is actually one of those areas that we will be talking about in our next and final 2021 session next month. But let's just go a little bit further. So Forbes did a very interesting survey in regards to executive managers, and they surveyed, and clearly 92% of executive very clearly said that, you know, the PMO is the driving force when it comes to transformation, or when it comes to transforming organization, using disruptive technology, digitalization and automation of processes, ensuring that we have that trustworthiness of the data. A little peek preview in what we are talking about next month. I wanted to put that into the slide deck because it sets the scene a little bit of why we are talking about this controlled governance today. So Gartner actually has brought out a very good paper that we will include the next time as well, which is the strategic roadmap for the PMO. And clearly what they are saying, you know, PMO leaders are challenged if they are stagnating and relying too heavily on their original premises and purpose. And really it had to do with that governance part. And we see this still even in the responses that we have today. Their prediction really goes down that PMO leaders must evolve the PMO into a proactive, strategic organization that enables values contribution. So really looking more into the benefit realization and into, you know, into the true reason why we actually execute initiatives. So next time we will talk a little bit more about that, which also then looks back a little bit into last month Ask the Expert session. If you are interested in sort of that path of a PMO, from a PMO to an EPMO to an SPMO, strategic PMO, I encourage you to watch the last session of last month as well, which was actually most interesting. So that's just a little bit of a recap of last time. The strategic roadmap overview of the project management office has actually quite a lot of directions that you as the PMO can take. Again, we will include some of the preview into this pack this time, but next time we will actually talk in more detail about that. What we do take away from that ultimately is that the customer expectation in regards to how we used to run PMO really starts to change, and the expectation starts to focus more on the outcome and more on the strategic direction, ensuring that we as the PMO are the glue between executive managers as well as the execution team, whether these are project managers, departments, program or portfolio managers. Again, that goes hand in hand with what Forbes really predicts, saying that, look, in the past, project management was really the measurement of terms in regards to time, budget, deliverables, and that shift starts to move over more into an innovative project management, ensuring that we actually deliver the outcome that we initially anticipated, with the knowledge that projects change, right? The ability for us to plan something and then finding at the end that we actually have done something else is very common. Often this is referred to as the failure of the project. Well, if we think about it in a more innovative context, you will find that as long as project managers focus on the bigger picture of why we deliver something, it will not be perceived as a failure, but actually as a very successful project implementation. I always like to make the analogy of the Sydney Opera House, which from a project delivery perspective was a complete failure with I don't know how many times overrun of budget and time. to now being the landmark that is worldwide recognized. So the success of this project is huge in comparison to when you looked at it at the pure on time and on budget delivery. So make sure that you understand that. Well, what does that actually mean from a governance impact from a PMO perspective? In the past, it was quite easy. Well, easy relatively, because we kind of had the different, we kind of had a consistent way of managing projects. And as the PMO really, these days, we have to combine both the traditional as well as the agile path. And the questions that we see in PMOs these days is, how do I combine this all? What is that overarching governance for me? What do teams want to see now when it comes to the different ways of us delivering projects? How do I determine scope and time and cost in an agile sense? And what does outcome actually mean in an agile world? And that question then extends itself, where we know that an agile delivery process is very much a team-centric delivery process, and Paul will talk a little bit more about that in a short while, in comparison to that traditional way where the project delivery was really in the focused supplying resources, in comparison to the agile, where we actually have a pool of resources continuously supplying deliveries or outcomes per sprint. So this is really the overarching question that we want to answer today when it comes to governance. Now, it's not what, but why you do it, right? And that's really ultimately the reason, not just blindly following the processes, saying, well, but you do have to put this tick into the stage gate because I told you so, instead of actually looking really what I refer to as the big picture. And I think when it comes to innovation, moving out of that forest of trees and having that overarching view of the entire forest will enable us to look at that big picture. Now, why do I say that? Well, if I look at the big picture from a traditional governance point of view, I refer to that as the waterfall. We quite often had sort of the strategic goal and the portfolio being really planned on a high level, on an executive level, and then being somehow communicated to the PMO, that somehow had to communicate that, of course, to the team, and somehow the team had to, through different mechanisms, determine really what that deliverable, that big picture deliverable was. It's interesting, I used to run surveys when we did workshops, and I used to ask project managers, hey, why do you execute that project? And you know what most of the times the answer was? Well, because I was told to. In comparison to understanding, well, actually part of that bigger picture, I am a puzzle piece of that bigger picture of accomplishing our strategic goals. Now, you as the PMO, of course, last time we called it the toothless tiger, really have to climb that edge, trying to glue and map both of these planning versus delivery together. And I know how challenging that is, especially if you don't really have a team, but utilize a team from different departments, where you may not even have, responsibility for project managers or for teams, where you quite often are, well, the administrative glue of bringing reports together or visualization together. So that's really that traditional sense that we've seen, and that was very challenging. I call it that very, well, I'm going to call it the right radical side of it, in comparison to that very purist agile way, which I call it the very left radical side of it, where we have actually organizations that utilize the scaled agile framework, and that's called SAFe. Right now, version 5 is out, where you can literally operate your entire organization in a very agile sense. The purpose of that, Paul will outline a little bit in a little bit more detail. I know that most of the organizations and PMOs that are on this call will say, yeah, we do have some kind of agile together. At the same time, though, my executive still wants to know, hey, how long does it take? How much does it cost me? And what do I get at the end of it, right? That classical triangle, which is extremely difficult, if not counterproductive, to the way that we actually implement agile ways. So it's super interesting to see that, you know, that shift from a traditional way versus the agile way. Or can it be hybrid? And we know that most of the organizations these days are actually starting to go down this hybrid path. I love that picture here. It's a very good friend of mine who drew that from Denmark. He's a very smart guy. And he really calls it, you know, we are shifting from the organizations as machines to the organizations as an organism. And I think this actually is a nice analogy of how we move from a traditional project sense into an agile project sense, because suddenly it's not the silos anymore. It is the team collaboration that brings the entire knowledge in the agile sense. So I really love that picture, and it represents very nicely that ultimately we need to find the balance, as with everything, you know, not too right, not too left, but finding what's right for us. Well, with all of that being said, I do like to have one more poll, and this is the last poll for this one here, is, you know, what kind of environment do you actually work in right now? Are you working in, you know, all the way traditional or all the way agile, or a hybrid and in between, or you may even have, I'm going to call it, your own way of working, which, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. If you could let me know what kind of, environment you are working in. Yeah, look, I can see it already with only 10 responses, 20 responses. Come on, guys, we can do a bit more. We've got over 30, 40 people here, 28. Push your buttons, please, and it only confirms what we all see, that, you know, the hybrid really is that sensible path where we need to satisfy different roles. On one hand, executives needing to plan their budget and their time and their deliverables, and then on the other hand, of course, having teams focusing not so much on administration but on outcomes. And really that is what that traditional and agile combination, the hybrid combination, is. So thank you very much for the respondents. With that, I would like to outline a little bit more, what does agility actually mean? And with that, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Paul. Paul, please, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Interestingly, I've realized that since Agile has been around, it's been 21 years, right? So it's not really a new way of working. We've been using it for a long time. And executives have noticed that it does work. Small teams, autonomous, multidisciplinary, they can deliver. So they have started thinking, how about we do it for the whole organization? We move it into HR, into marketing. What are the results going to be? So that's where the need for agility has born from. And the customer is really the one that is changing that. But as enticing as that vision might seem, it's very challenging, right? Many organizations struggle to find out which of the areas within their functions they are supposed to move to Agile. It's not uncommon for organizations to launch many Agile teams only to be slowed down by bureaucracy, bottlenecks, and that sort of thing. So Mark, if you go to the next slide, talking about scaled Agile, they have what they call the 7 competencies, where an organization can measure themselves to see how agile are we really as an organization. And if you look at this image, interestingly, on the left side, you see that it's purely focused on execution, and then on the right-hand side is mainly focused on strategy. But in the middle of all this is the customer, right? So that's the most important metric. That's what we need to be looking at, whether we are delivering value to the customer. Underpinning all that, you can see that we have the lean agile leadership. So in terms of leadership, the leaders are the ones that are supposed to drive those kind of behaviors that we are looking for, right? I'm talking about your project boards, your project steering committees turning into project working groups, right? Being on the shop floor on sprint review days, looking at the value that we are delivering to customers rather than waiting for the reports. When we look at the enterprise solution delivery, if you look at some of the complex systems that we are delivering now to solve some of the most challenging, things that we have found within this century, for instance, delivering vaccines, to states, to nations, is complex. So being able to bring in some engineering knowledge across the organization from HR to marketing, you have to measure yourself against that to see whether as an organization you deliver that. With agile product delivery, like we've been saying, you have to be customer-centric focused, not execution focused. We are talking about outcomes. So with Agile project delivery, that's what you need to be looking at. Team and technical agility, the great Agile delivery is underpinned by great teams, right? So it's more about the team performance rather than the individual performance. So that's the competency that you are measuring yourself against. Then when we go into the side of strategy, if we are looking at the lean portfolio competency, it's about aligning your strategy to your execution, right? Not looking at the right figures, whether your projects or initiatives are delivering the key results and looking at the objectives that you're supposed to be delivering. If you look at organizational agility, we are talking about the lead times. You know, there are too many handovers in your organizations. IT has to do a handover to sales and you know, different handovers. So we are talking about organizing your teams in such a way that there are very little handovers. We are talking about organizing teams according to value streams, right? How can we get the value to the customer as fast as we can? And then if you look at a continuous learning culture, you have to understand as an organization that innovation does not happen on the weekends or it doesn't happen at night. Innovation happens during the workday. So being able to allow your teams to have that space to be able to learn new things and innovate, these are very important. So the 7 competencies, that's what pretty much it is that organizations need to measure themselves against that. Mark, if we go to the next slide.
Yeah, Paul, just quickly, when we talk about customer-centric, it's not just, of course, external-facing customers. You know, when we have a PMO with internal-facing projects, we would then, of course, mean, you know, departments or particular areas would be our customers. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So, and in Agile, right? So these ones, we're calling the Agile governance windows, but depending on which side of the fence that you are sitting, you can even look at them as opportunity windows, right? Because if you look at, for instance, a traditional delivery in terms of visibility, we start a project, we set some milestones where we are supposed to report on how we are delivering the value. And then in the end, we do the big showcase, right? But if you look at an Agile project, at every iteration or every cycle, at your PI, at your sprint review, the team is showing what they are doing. So there's visibility there. There's a chance for governance. Same with value. With your Agile project, you are delivering increments of value at every iteration, rather than waiting in the end to do the big review. And there's a risk as well. When we start an Agile project, sometimes we don't know the full thing that we are going to deliver, but we have the big picture in mind that we are going to deliver a particular thing. So once we start delivering increments of value, you can see that our risk really goes down because we know we are going to get there or not. Yeah. So these are governance windows where opportunities for the PMO, right, to really affect the project or the initiative in terms of how it's being driven. Yeah. Mark, we can go to the next slide. So we look at this Scrum framework, which I think is one of the most popular that is being used around. I think many on the call are very familiar with this image here, where you have a product backlog. You go into a sprint planning session, you select some of the items in your backlog for your sprint, and then the team goes away for 2 weeks or whatever your cycle is, and then they meet every day to talk about what they are working on, and at the end of the day, they show the increment. Now, Mark, if you go to the next slide, you see that underpinning this, there are 3 main values that you're looking at. You're looking at transparency, you're looking at adaptability, and inspection. And when we look at transparency, I mean, in an Agile team, the product backlog is there for all to see, right? So as a PMO, you know exactly what these guys are delivering against. If you look at the sprint backlog, it's the same thing. You know what these people are delivering for that sprint. So there are many points within the Agile framework where we are really giving whoever is in charge the opportunity to look at what a team is doing. So you can see that the governance is actually built into the system. I don't think that there's any other methodology where people check their work so much as in an Agile style of delivery, where the real value that you're getting is that we know that we are checking our work with every iteration, with every cycle. So what is coming out is really what a customer expects. And even when we deliver the increment, right, the customer can still influence that and say that, look, this is not exactly what I want. I want you to change course. So we are able to adapt and then now refocus our product backlog and say that these are the things that we are now going to consider in this next sprint or the next subsequent sort of sprint. So in an agile way of delivery, the governance is actually designed into the product. So the PMO, right, needs to have a look at what kind of governance they are applying to it. It has to be a bit more lightweight, right? Because the teams are already checking themselves doing the delivery of the product or doing the delivery of the project. Yeah, Mark, we can go. Do you want to, Mark, you're on mute if you want to talk about this one.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to take a breather.
Yeah.
And thought, why don't we open up the microphone? I'd love to hear some feedback of organizations where they attempt to, and I call it attempt on purpose, where they attempt to go down the agile path and what you have as sort of those main challenges. Do you have any experience there? Please don't be shy. It stays amongst us.
Hi, I've got one. It's Michelle from City of Gold Coast. And what I'm finding is in my past organisation, in my previous organisation, they were very good at getting funding up front and having a product roadmap and being able to use that roadmap as justification for funding for, say, a financial year. But I think there's a, you know, money is the big thing that everyone's concerned about, and it's changing that mindset to say, well, look, we'd like you to commit X amount of dollars for all these things that we're going to do, and then we're going to package them all up together and later, but here's the big idea and we want some funding for it, and it's just changing that whole way that funds are allocated, which is something I'm trying to work on at the moment.
Yeah, look, this is a very difficult part, and I hear this quite often, and I think that's where really the executive mind shift needs to occur, because Agile doesn't necessarily mean that you don't know what you deliver, right? It ultimately is the bigger picture. It's just you may not have every single puzzle piece, and the puzzle pieces that you may have in place may also mean that they need to shift. And it doesn't mean that it costs more. It actually means that you ultimately produce better value, maybe at a higher price than initially anticipated. But yeah, look, I hear you loud and clear. And I think especially government departments where this budget cycle is still very annual, and when you approve or when you want to have something approved, then you need to approve the whole thing so that they know exactly what you're going to deliver. That's really that initial, waterfall thinking on us then delivering it in a sprint manner. And then we are surprised that by the end of it, we actually didn't exactly deliver what we initially anticipated. So that's what I would refer to as almost the education gap from an executive perspective. That's where we need to think about getting our process right. Shifting that in particular in the government, that can be difficult. So yes, I feel your pain. Thank you for sharing that.
And Mark, I always say that in terms of budgeting and finance, that's the most difficult part of this, right? Because I think I always tell you that there's something that you told me once that I'll never forget, that with Agile, you're actually renting the team, right, rather than renting the outcome. So we might not finish everything on the backlog, but what can we, do in the iterations that we have set for? So just changing the mindset to be able to work in that mode, that's the hard part.
Of course, it would though mean that, executives still at the end want to say, well, it's great that I rent a team, but what are you going to give to me? It's still that overarching part. Yeah, interesting. Look, I'm not sure which one was first, but Tim, you're the first one up, first cap of the rank. So I'm just going to open up the mic for you.
Great, thanks, Mark. Look, I think Michelle really hit the nail on the head in terms of it's been a real challenge to define a product backlog. And then, because in my organization, it's very common for you to have to get those signatures to say that's exactly what the scope is going to be, which kind of flies in the face of, we don't know exactly what we're planning on delivering until we're kind of in the weeds, if you will. The second challenge with my organization is that I find that it's really hard for us to release on demand. It's a very built up procedure that has a lot of planning and a lot of activities that go into it. So it's very complex for us to say we don't we'd like to drop this into a production environment tomorrow because it's got a 2-week lead time.
Oh, again, I love that feedback. Thank you, Tim. I can hear this again loud and clear. A mind shift, not only from an executive perspective when it comes to the annual budget distribution, but also from a point of view of, of release trains. I mean, that's the whole idea, having release trains, not having a freeze period where, cynically speaking, where the IT department is sort of the key holder and only opens up the doors when they feel comfortable with it. It is the whole organization that needs to think about that. Yeah, thank you very much. Awesome feedback. Peter.
Thank you, Mark. Peter from Deloitte IT. We actually met a couple of times. Not sure you remember.
Of course.
Two challenges that I have. One is around the big organizations very focused on compliance, cybersecurity, a safe environment, cloud environment. We have a lot of reviews around architecture, cybersecurity. We run some project agile, but those processes are still very waterfall. We're still trying to see how we can fit those activities. You have your increment releases. Does the architecture has the architecture been changed, or do we need to do another security review? Those processes still sort of lag behind, very waterfall. We find challenging to fit the whole compliance piece into the agile world.
Yeah. So, Peter, very much. You know what we call it? I always say, well, obviously we're a Microsoft partner. We implement everything in Office 365. And when it comes to compliance and security, I always say Microsoft is the architect and we are the interior designers. So one of the tips that I can give you is that when you are in a release cycle, and if you change certain things, well, you really don't change the things outside of the boundaries of the cloud, I'm just going to call it. Again, I know it's a tiny little shift, but as long as you comply always within those frames that security and cybersecurity in particular sets out, then you should be able to continuously increment your new capabilities. I mean, this is how Microsoft does it in Office 365. I know that's how we do it in our product, where we at the start ensure that cybersecurity is comfortable with it, because we are using Microsoft as the architect, and we then tell them, well, look, we're just painting the house or the room inside the house, or we're just adding a new cushion in there, or just add a new mirror in there. And maybe that's sort of the way that you could outline it there, Peter. But yes, I see that all the time. Again, it's a bit of a mind shift, and look, being a consulting company and going into external customers, I know that it's often an educational process that can take quite some time. Yeah.
The other one, if I can raise, is also around, because we are changing to sort of agile world. Some still running the waterfall, some we're starting to run agile style projects. The other one is that I think is also the change in management around people. What's the impact on the traditional PM BA role? In the agile world, where you don't really have a title or role, is whatever is needed. You might be a test lead, you might be a Scrum Master, all sorts of roles. I think that can get some people very nervous around. What does that mean to their career? What does that mean to their role and title in the agile world? I think that we're still sort of thinking about how to assure people still get their career progression in the new world.
Yeah, look, in particular when it comes to agile, I mean, the purpose of a project manager traditionally was accountability. The way, if a project went pear-shaped, I was able to make the project manager the accountable person. Now, in the agile sense, and Paul said it quite nicely, it is actually the entire team that is responsible. So every single person is responsible for the piece of sprint task that they complete. And I think that mind shift, it becomes not so much a hierarchical sense anymore. It really becomes sort of a lean sense. That's why they call it lean. And yes, I can see the nervousness of certain team members that on one hand may not want to have that type of responsibility, but on the other hand, of course, you have the high flyers that do want to have that progression path. Yeah, it's very good feedback, Peter. If you find the ultimate golden answer, please come back and let us know.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Great feedback. Thank you. I'm sorry, I think it's Leighton. That's your first name.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
You got it bang on. Fantastic. Hey, I just wanted to note something about executive confidence in this conversation as well. We're a fairly large government agency, and we've spent many years and a lot of money and a lot of time building out true safe release trains. But from an executive point of view, it's very hard to get them to understand that reporting, for example, is very different from an Agile point of view. It's very hard to get them to understand that we needed to be funded differently for Agile projects. And the most dangerous part of all from an executive point of view is as soon as something goes a little bit pear-shaped, it's quick revert back to the old way we used to do things, which is even more dangerous than staying on the course that we're on, because it means that extra resources are given to turning a project back into a traditional method from an Agile project. And the pandemic has proven to us that the whole organisation can't really pivot using Agile. Instead, they revert back to the old ways of doing things. And the danger in that is we still have people walking around talking about their Agile mindset, but they're not doing the processes that go with it.
Leighton, I couldn't agree more. Again, what do they say? A fish rots from its head, and in many ways, again, because of that accountability that executives face, they do get nervous at times trying to push that entire sprint thinking and agile thinking through is really difficult. However, one of the next slides will sort of introduce a little bit of that hybrid model and what that control actually could mean in both traditional and agile way. Maybe that sort of gives you also a bit of an idea. But yes, education and awareness creation from an executive point of view is absolutely vital in order to make agile successful. Yeah, thanks for that feedback. Tim, I'm not sure. Tim, did you have another feedback? Oh, no. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Good.
Can you hear me, Tim? All right.
Sorry, if you're talking to me, yes, I could hear you, but I had put my hand down.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you for double checking.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, wow, what a great feedback. Thank you so much. I think it really outlines the challenge that we face in the PMO from that traditional, governance way. Hey, you need to cross the tick box to how do we actually deliver high value? But I can assure you, there are hybrid models available. And when we say hybrid, so yes, we can. I love that picture. Yes, an elephant can definitely have butterfly ears and still look beautiful and make sense. Look, Paul, maybe it does make sense for you to look at the different metrics and looking at the same goal. If you could maybe run through with that would be awesome.
Yeah. And Mark, in terms of metrics, I think that usually people want to find out what is the best metric, to measure your agile teams, to measure your traditional teams. And I say that the best metric, right, to look at is whether the customer is satisfied, right? So you can deliver something on budget, in schedule. I mean, all the traditional ones that we looked at. But if the customer is not satisfied, you are actually not meeting the target. So if you look at it, regardless of how you're running the project, execs are asking the same questions. They're asking, is it going to finish on time? Are you going to come and ask me for more money? How are things going? And depending on what type of project that you're running, you're going to use different things. You're going to use different tools. You're going to use different metrics, but the goal is the same. So for a PMO, you have to be asking the different questions in the language that these teams are understanding to be able to, for instance, for your reporting, to be able to report properly. Now, if we go deeper into it, right, there are things that are universal. For instance, your risk on an agile project is the same as your risk on a traditional project. It's just that it might be different, and the way that you're looking at it, and also governed or more influenced by how your organization's posture, right? So you have to find the middle ground that really works for you as a team. So for instance, if you look at a traditional sort of project, you might be looking at your deliverables and your major milestones completion to look at whether it's on schedule. But in an agile project, you can look at your sprint then down, sprint velocity. When it comes to your budget, I think that pretty much is the same thing, whether your forecast and actuals are, you know, on point. And then in terms of effort for an agile project, it's just that the terminology and the language changes, but what we are truly trying to achieve is the same. So Mark, if you go to the next slide, I think that you can talk a bit more about the controlled way.
Yeah, look, and this really represents quite nicely what the different metrics are, and the challenge that you as the PMO have, you know, on one hand, like schedule, well, finish on time. What does that mean in the agile world, right? There are actually ways how you can do that, and really in a budgetary sense, what you do is you actually approve sprints. And these sprints, which is the time, the duration, will ultimately at least outline certain deliverables per sprint. That's why we have backlogs. So you can actually report on those kinds of times and combine that traditionally as well as waterfall. Now, we refer to this as the controlled governance. Now, the controlled governance really outlines the commonality between the different processes, because ultimately we still deliver outcome. Now, how we deliver the outcome is of course different. And when I look at that, I know that no matter whether you use waterfall or whether you use agile, scrum, or, you know, DevOps or anything else, there are certain components that lie almost like a rainbow or umbrella over that. Resource management being one of them, because you always compete against resources. Work is accomplished by resources. Projects are work and resources. It's just the way it is. So we need to make sure that we have that unified governance process, understanding from a senior and executive and key stakeholder perspective what is important to them. So we know scope is typically one that is important to it. And even though you may not be able in an agile project to outline what the final scope by the end of it is, well, in many ways, in a project, in a waterfall project, you only write them down to discover by the end that you run out of funds and need to then increase your change request or your budget overrun. So in many ways, it's the same way. Same with, you know, costs, benefits. We always know what benefits are. Deliverables, whether this is per sprint or whether this is per major milestones. And of course, the health of a project can always be determined based on their key performance indicators. And these key performance indicators do not change no matter whether you have a waterfall or an agile. So we really need to also understand that agile is not the blank check that allows us to do anything. It still needs to go into that overarching picture that I fit into. So in our experience, the major parts that are always controlled, no matter what type of methodology you use, are the appropriate strategy association. Now, you can do that in different ways, benefit realization being one of them, OKRs being the other one, objective and key results. We will have more on that in the new year, I promise you, but it really is that glue between execution and strategic goals. Of course, critical milestones, and critical milestones can also be incorporated into sprints. That is absolutely possible. Risks, issues, all of these things can still be incorporated in an agile and a waterfall sense. Even stage gate approvals, and I think, Peter, you outlined it nicely, the change management component, no matter whether it's waterfall or agile, still needs to happen. We need to be able to plan for that. So it has to be very clearly a backlog item in my agile way, or it needs to be a planned item in my waterfall. It's just the way that we really capture that. Financial forecasting is possible, very possible, actually almost easier in an agile sense, because you have your team always available. You know that, hey, these are the 5 FTEs that are going to work on this sprint, and therefore I can budget it quite easily. In comparison of determining this task that takes this long, and this task that takes this long, and this task that takes this long, but I may not have the resources because they may need to work on multiple different projects. Therefore, resource demand and capacity in an agile sense generally is easier because we have them as a full-time team. I know not every team and not every agile project has full-time team members, but you have predetermined allocated times that you can plan. So therefore, that is that overarching controlled metrics that you can use. And plunking these then into your business roadmaps will always allow you from an executive point of view to see that you are walking down that path. Digitalization happens. We do this on a daily basis really with Sensei IQ these days, where we need to make sure that the different, trying to reach Mount Everest starts with the first step at the bottom. We need to track those steps, and that's just the way it is. And these roadmaps will allow you to track that. So that's what we refer to as the controlled governance, ensuring that we have that unified governance process, understanding the measurements that are equal no matter what type of process you have. That will ensure that you actually can put your executive stakeholders at ease, as well as your team that not only runs around like, well, I could like to call it like headless chickens in a sprint. They still have a purpose of that bigger picture. It's interesting, they do surveys in regards to how often do you need to retrain people until it becomes a real routine? People tend to forget every 3 months, so you reiterate that every 3 months. In a project, in an agile project, I would strongly recommend that part of your sprint review is start with the big picture. Hey, this is the big picture. This is the puzzle piece that we've added to it. That will always allow us to still move into the right direction. And in an agile sense, we actually have the ability then to also see, you know what, this color shouldn't be red, this should be blue. And therefore you have the ability to adjust based on that bigger picture. So I hope that this picture here will give you sort of a bit of a way of thinking on how you could ensure that you have that combined metrics no matter what type of project you have. Waterfall, agile, we are looking at the hybrid sense. With that, we are spot on time, Paul. Not bad. It's good when you can talk fast, I tell you. We do have some questions that were pre-written. I also encourage you to ask some more questions. I'll go through the ones that have been pre-posted. Can you outline some examples of where Agile is being successfully incorporated into an organizational annual budget cycle so that budget, benefit, velocity, and deliverables can all sit comfortably in the same conversation? Yes, we do. And I think ensuring that we understand that Agile goes into a bigger picture and follows that bigger picture, you do have the ability to have an annual budget cycle actually based on sprints. And that's how most agile organizations have the ability to plan that. I think the issue really is that executives often don't understand that agile is a team-centric project delivery, whereby waterfall is a pure project-centric delivery. So, it's almost like needing to handcraft a car, which used to be done before Mr. Ford created the assembly line. And really, that is a very good analogy between handcrafting a car, the Bentley or the, the Rolls-Royce. They still do it the traditional way in comparison to the Tesla, where they now have a fully automated way of producing a car and therefore also getting the benefits. I think as a PMO, it's also super important that you think about the ability to automate those, and really the digitalization of the project management office. And no, I'm not talking about Excel, is really there. You do have the ability to automate those processes so deeply these days that people don't even know they follow that process. It's just a natural way of dealing with it. So if you are interested in that, by the way, maybe put that into the feedback form. We'd love to showcase also how we've helped people and organizations to automate their processes to gain trustworthy information. As an accountant, I always used to say when I went to my board, I gave them my profit and loss statement. Oh yeah, there's my timer. Stop talking, Mark. As an accountant, I always used to give my board my profit and loss statement, and they trusted that. Well, these days, as a PMO, if you give your board your portfolio status report or your PMO report, would they bet their career on that? If the answer to that is yes, you're doing awesome. Most of the times that may not be the case. That's really the key essence of these examples here. For Agile project, I would like to understand how we configure the system in which values we would set to indicate when a project is going through a cycle of develop, test, release, post-implementation support. So really the project life cycle as compared to a waterfall project. Well, actually you incorporate those within the sprint, and that's the nice thing. Yes, there's a certain component up front that you need to design, create your big picture, your backlog, really make sure that this backlog understands the high value that the business needs to have delivered, so that you can then use that. And really, as part of that sprint cycle, you do exactly that. You have sprint cycles where you do the planning, where you do the development, where you do the testing, where you do even the training, where you do the release. It just is in smaller increments. It's not the big picture that you paint. It really is the puzzle piece that you paint. So if you think about that and retoggle that, then you will actually very quickly discover that it's ultimately the same thing. It's just in smaller increments. What are the top metrics for measuring agile effectiveness? Great question. The slide deck that Paul outlines is actually the one from a pure agile perspective. It has to do with burn down tasks, with your backlog being, they say that a backlog usually never goes down because it always has new stuff into it, but really it is measured ultimately, and Paul, you mentioned it beautifully, on the customer satisfaction, because that's the big picture. That's what we want to achieve. So check out the other slide deck that Paul was talking to when we talked about waterfall metrics versus agile metrics. We will, of course, send you the content pack after the session. Alice will do a wonderful job doing that, and I hope that will help you there as well. Now, these were all of the questions that were posted before the meeting. Now, we still have about 5 minutes to go. Are there any questions that you may want to address to us today? And by the way, if not, and you come up with another question, please just send us an email. We will collect them and we will actually add them to the content pack as well. Wow. Can you see, Paul? We have answered all of the questions. Safe training. Great question, Matthew. So there are a bunch of different training companies. Paul, where did you do your safe training?
Recently, I did Partners and did a really good job.
Well, without being, being a commercial company here, what was the training company that you used? Did you do that online?
No, so mine was with PM Partners.
Oh, it was, okay, PM Partners, yep. They're one of our partners, so they're a good company. Yeah. So look, there are actually lots of, I'm sure if you use, Father Google, they will tell you all of those things. That being said, there are also really good online contents that you can use. Yeah, it is training plentiful. The only comment that I would like to make is training doesn't make you an expert, it makes you a novice. Applying what you learned makes you the expert. And that's a super important path. All right, are there any other questions, Alice? Let me just have a look at the comment box.
We've just had, one more come through the chat, Mark, from Dennis. So PMO on post-COVID and the new normal, which I guess is probably what we'll talk to in our last session for the year, right?
Thank you. Yes, without having paid you, thank you. Our next session will actually talk exactly around that. It is the strategic path that we discovered in 2021. Really, the digitalization is key here in many ways. From a PMO perspective. I mean, hey, in Sydney as well as in Melbourne, we've been working from home for the last 3 months. Didn't mean that the PMO had to stop working. We just used different technologies. And actually, to be quite frank, I think there will be a new normal, and that new normal will be, it doesn't matter whether you work from home or whether you work in the company. We have the ability to do it because we have access to it all. Digitalization, right? So that's really key here. Well, with all of that, I would like to thank you very much and encourage you to check out the next step. Obviously, the webinar recordings will follow with the content shortly. If you were able to not attend that, or if you want to share these, there will be links to the recording. Please, no problem of sharing that. Connect with us either through LinkedIn, or if you have any kind of recommendations or questions that you would like us to address, please follow us on that link here as well. And if you could fill in a short feedback form, allowing us also to get direct customer feedback, because just like in any kind of agile way, we want to make sure that our customers are happy and satisfied too. With that, I would like to thank you very much, and I would thank you that you have sacrificed your lunch for the session. I hope it was worth your while.
Thank you.
Look at that, 5 minutes to go. Perfect. Thank you so much. Have an awesome day.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, Mark and Paul. Appreciate it.
Thank you.